Imagine this. It's a misty morning in medieval Europe. The harbor is quiet, except for a faint, haunting sound of coughing. Suddenly, a ship emerges from the mist. A ship unlike any other. Its crew, not sailors, but the cursed, the abandoned, and the forgotten. This is the dark, forgotten story of the Leprosy Ships, the floating prisons that carried the infected to their doom. Stay with me until the end, because this is a chapter of history that will haunt your nights forever. Today, we're diving into one of the darkest and most heartbreaking moments in history, when fear of disease turned ships into prisons, and desperate people were condemned to wander the seas until death claimed them. This is the story of leprosy ships and floating prisons, and how medieval Europe isolated its infected. Leprosy. Just the word itself sparked terror across Europe for over 1,000 years, a disease that rotted flesh, twisted fingers, disfigured faces, and condemned its victims to a lifetime of isolation. The disease itself was bad enough, but the stigma was far worse. In a world dominated by superstition, leprosy was seen as a curse from God, a mark of sin. Imagine waking up one morning with a single spot on your skin. Suddenly, your friends no longer recognize you. The church that embraced you now shuns you. The village that felt like home is now a place you can never return to. At the height of the leprosy terror, authorities came up with a grim solution: to banish the infected to ships. These weren't rescue vessels or hospitals. These were floating prisons, condemned to drift the seas indefinitely. The ships were packed with the sick, the dying, and the abandoned. They called them leprosy galleys or pest ships, and for countless people, these boats were their tomb. Picture this scene: a leprosy ship drifting in a mist-cloaked harbor. The planks creak with the weight of despair. The infected huddle in corners, too sick to stand. The salty air is thick with the smell of decay. The sound of coughing and faint cries for help rise from the lower deck, only to be drowned out by the crashing waves. These ships weren't meant to heal. They weren't meant to save. They were meant to contain, to isolate, to forget. Why? Because in an era with no knowledge of germs, people believed leprosy could wipe out communities. The sick were thrown out of villages, barred from churches, and refused entry into markets. The authorities built leper colonies far from the cities, isolated islands, walled compounds, deserted ruins, places where no one came and from which no one returned. But when the colonies overflowed, and when fear rose like wildfire across Europe, ships became the ultimate solution. They could banish the infected to the open seas and pray the disease would sink with them. What was life like for those condemned to the leprosy ships? Huddled together, disease-ridden and desperate, surrounded by death and despair. They would watch as land disappeared from view, knowing this was their final journey. Yet amid the misery, stories of resilience emerged. The abandoned would create their own tiny floating worlds, sharing songs, memories, and moments of quiet humanity as the waves crashed around them. Today, leprosy can be treated and cured, but the terror of those days still lingers. The leprosy ships were more than prisons. They were symbols of a society gripped by fear. They remind us how quickly cruelty can arise when ignorance rules, and how desperately humans long for belonging, even in their darkest moments. So the next time you walk down a quiet harbor or stand on an abandoned shore, remember the lost ships. and the forgotten stories. The leprosy ships weren't just floating prisons. They were a warning about how fear can justify cruelty, how stigma can ruin lives, and how even in despair, the human spirit can cling to life. If this story shook you, hit that like button, subscribe for more hidden stories from history, and share this video with anyone who needs to remember that even the forgotten deserve to be remembered.